Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm thrilled to finally get to talk to you about this film.
I love it. I'm in.
I,
Do it.
I am such a fan of the Mitchells versus the Machines.
Oh, thank
You really, you stepped out of the box with this one.
Yeah.
And it's a real standout in this year's field of Oscar nominees in particular.
So,
I hope so too. I was very excited at Hollywood Critics Association Awards the other week when you guys won.
yeah, no, us too. I mean, it's a real honor.
And of course, we also gave you, you picked up mid-year awards from us last summer for the film.
I love the mid-year awards. Meant a lot to me. No joke. Me and Jeff were like, we won for screenplay. What? That was a big deal. And seriously, you guys do really, both help us, find movies that we love, and also, teach us about this art form that we love.
What stuck out for me last year from the moment I saw the film is, number one, your story. So HCA's award to you for screenplay was so merited because, number one, you do a dad and daughter storyline, which we never see enough of. And every daughter out there loves dad and daughter stories. I don't care what they may say, they love them. In their heart, they love them. You go on a road trip, which always opens up wonderful avenues for animation and story exploration.
Yeah.
And then you incorporate your own great love of movies and pop culture into this meld of a 2D, 3D kind of animation style and then punctuate it all with vibrancy, color that just leaps off the screen. You blend animation with geometric lines of compartmentalizing with the robots versus the roundness and the quirkiness of everything else. And you've got everything going against everything else, so it just melds perfectly.
Thank you. I love it. You noticed all the things we did.
The geometric lines, that I just fell in love with, right down to the robots themselves, with the hard lines there, but then all the imperfections of humanity and love. This movie, ultimately, your story is about achieving the imperfection of humanity and love. A dysfunctional family is actually the most normal thing there is.
Yeah, totally.
And you really bring that to light. I mean, everybody's heard the story, the journey you've been on, but how do you actually, once you get this idea in your head, where did this begin for you? Because it is animation. How do you start animating something like this?
I mean, I think it all came down to one huge thing for us was that we had this open canvas. We were at a place like Sony, and there was no rules, and there's no house style, and there's no formula, so we could basically do whatever we wanted, which was wonderful. So the only sort of limitation we had was our own imaginations, really, which is it sounds trite, but it was really true. So we went down and we sat down with Jeff Rowe, co-director, and Lindsay Oliveras, who's the production designer, and Guillermo Martinez, who's the head of story, and we were just talking about how to tell the story in the best way possible, and we really realized that the movie had these two worlds in it, and we wanted the human world to feel loved up and lived in and organic as possible, and if that was the case, and we wanted to feel really real, like as if you went to your aunt's house growing up and you're like, whoa, I remember that, weird sign from Michael's on the wall that says "Live, Laugh, Love" or whatever. And then, so we wanted to feel like these are real people and that you could meet, and that if you saw them on the street, you'd be like, yeah, I know those guys. But, and then so on the other side of things, when we put that up on the wall, we tried to figure out the thing that's the furthest from it possible. And one of our artists, Arthur, found these like James Turrell installations and this like geometric artwork by a bunch of wonderful artists, and we're like, oh, these things look incredible next to each other. So we were basically, and also just trying to lean into, on the human side, can we be as observational as possible, look at real life, and look at, like, for example, my own family and the rest of our families, and try to pull and make them feel as human and real as possible. And then on the other side of things, how can it feel as innovative as possible? How can these robots move in a crazy way that you've never seen before? How can this robot city look totally wild and different in a way that you've never seen before? And basically, and even in the, and then on top of that, have these Katie's drawings on the screen that bring more humanity to it. So the whole thing was, we were trying to make a movie that we would love, and we were trying to rebel against all the movies that we didn't like. And also having Kristen Miller and Phil Lord there was incredible, because they sort of cheered us on in all of our weirdest moments, and instead of the studio clamping down and saying, no, that's a little too out there, that's a little too wild, and they would say, like, no, that's the whole reason that people will see the movie in theaters, is that it's or on Netflix in this case, but is that it's undeniably unique, but it also is good at the same time, which is the balance you need to strike.
Well, and you did an excellent job striking that balance, but the other area, with the visuals and your use of color is just outstanding, and particularly with Katie's drawings. And as I'm looking at all of those and the little pop-ups that happen throughout the film with all the pop culture zeitgeist stuff that comes into play, all I could think about is, who has not, when they're sitting in class, even I did this back in the 60s and 70s, I will admit to it, I would doodle on the side of the page when I was bored in class, especially math class, and I would come up with a lot of geometric drawings like what I'm seeing in this film.
We went back and we found those drawings, we put them on the screen.
But, it's that color that also sets things apart. Was it difficult to come up with this color palette? Because that's also a balance that you found while making the humanity, the human element, come to life.
No, thanks for asking that. That's a great question. Our color stylist was a guy named Dave Bleish, and he's wonderful, and he's so thoughtful about the color choices, because we had these really bright, saturated, futuristic, technology type colors, because, one thing our production designer Lindsay would always talk about is, like, if you look at an app on your phone, it's always these really bright, flat colors. Mm-hmm. So those should be the colors of, like, the enemy, and technology are these really bright, saturated colors. So we tried to keep the rest of the movie kind of muted, color-wise, and not use these crazy bright colors, so that when we did see some, scene where you're in Pal's office and everything's like bright purple, that it's a real shock to your system, because you've been in all these warm earth tones and stuff. And that was something that the team was really thoughtful about. We really tried to be both be conservative about when we were using these bright colors, but also when we were, just put the pedal to the metal and be really bold, and not sort of hedge our sails and be like, well, it's a little blue. And it's like, no, this whole scene's going to be shooting blue out of the screen, and the whole theater will be blue when you're watching it, or whatever. So it was really fun working with those guys, because they were so excited about the opportunity to do something new that they just ran with it. And they every time I'd go into those color sessions, it was always a delight, because they always came up with something new to that blew us away.
Yeah, I'm in love with the color that you have in this film, because not only do you have the robotic world, you have the human world, but then you've got Katie's art.
Mm-hmm.
And you really, boy, it gets pumped up there, and
Yeah.
you've got such a mix of colors, but it's alive and you love it and you can't look away from it. So you really have three layers of color use happening here. And here again, it melds together. That contrast builds and melds perfectly.
Oh, thank you. I got to tell the guys about this. They're going to love this interview.
I love these geeky things in films, be it live action, be it animation, those structure considerations, the construct considerations of the building blocks of the film. And that's something that you do very well here, because through all of this, what you're also doing with your story is you've got a subtext going here about the importance of human connection over technology. And that color is very important at conveying the idea of human connection. Put down the phones. You don't need Roombas running around your house to do vacuuming. Go get a broom. Go get, go get a Swiffer. But that's so important with telling us that as an underlying subtext. And I just love that you incorporate that into this story.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice that you noticed. One thing that I think the movie, there's a lot going on in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing that ties it together is that, from a thematic standpoint, it's about Rick Mitchell, who is looking into the past and longing for this relationship that he used to have with his daughter, and Katie, who's looking to the future, and she's blind to the past, and Rick is blind to the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the end of the movie, they're both looking forward to the future and growing together, which is really nice. But also, we tried to do that exact same thing with the art style, where we look backwards to, because basically you'd have to find this synthesis of past and future.
Mm-hmm.
Is sort of one of the things that we're trying to do with the theme, and then we're also trying to find a synthesis of past and future with the art style, where you were using, we're inspired by illustration and 2D animation, but we're also using these zany, or these really futuristic Spider-Verse tools, and pushing them further than they've ever been pushed before, and sort of finding this combination of old and new. And same with the music, where Mark Mothersbaugh's using, all this traditional score, but he's also using tons of synthesizers and stuff and melding those two. So we're trying through the whole movie, and the same for the colors, where it's the colors of the past are these kind of warm, golden earth tones, and the colors of the future are these bright blue, crazy, salmons and greens and pinks. And then at the end of the movie, we tried to sort of combine those things and sort of find a unified way that those can live in harmony with each other.
Mm-hmm. Another great balance here, and that's within the characters themselves. While this is really in Katie's POV, this is Katie's story, but you find this great balance so that every character has their own story. How difficult was it to find that balance? Because some are very, very exciting, like Maya Rudolph's character of Linda. Boy, she gets her moments to shine in that third act, but you want to know more about Linda. And of course, you want to know more about, about Aaron. Everybody has a pesky little brother. Everybody, little brothers need to be heard. They need bigger stories sometimes.
Yeah.
So how challenging was it to find that balance within the story, but still shine a light on each of these characters?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The thing we realized is that the relationship between Rick and Katie was Katie is sort of the biggest pillar of the movie. And then her relationship with Rick is sort of the second biggest pillar. So those are your two pillars. And we found that you could have a story with Aaron as long as it related and tied into that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when Aaron and Linda were rooting for those two people to come together, and you got to see Aaron's vulnerability, and he said he's really scared about his sister leaving for college too, and that he kind of feels like Rick too, and that he's a little afraid to let her go. That really tied his story together and made it all click. And that he was, afraid. He was sort of like afraid to talk to this girl, but sort of he became bolder because he went through this really intense situation. And the same with Linda, where she's like she's trying to make everyone happy the whole time, and then she finally snaps. And she's the whole movie, she's like trying to push, Rick and Katie together, and she's like writing notes on cardboard and that sort of thing. And when all those arrows were pointed in the same direction, you could really flesh out those characters. But sometimes we would have these things where we would have side stories in older versions of the movie. We'd have side stories for Aaron and Linda that took the audience away from Rick and Katie's story, and it felt more diffuse and confusing, and it made the movie worse. But when they were all pointed towards the central emotional story, it all worked.
No, I think you did an excellent job of finding balance for each of the characters, so we get to learn about all of them. And even Pal. Pal is a very interesting character because Pal is, it's an AI character, but yet very human characteristics of jealousy and power and hurt. Very emotional. And I found that really interesting, Mike, that you went that direction.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we found out that you couldn't go in any other direction. The audience, again, it's the whole pillar of the movie is about this central relationship, about a daughter leaving and a dad feeling sort of obsolete. And we're like, okay, how do we make the story of Mark, this, tech creator, and Pal feel connected to that? And the way we did it was that, like, Rick is feeling obsolete and like he's being forgotten, and Pal is being obsolete and like she's being forgotten. And once those stories like mirrored each other, they sort of thematically clicked into place, and you cared about him, and you didn't care unless you felt like Pal actually had feelings. Like if you could feel Pal's hurt, all of a sudden you cared about it. And also it doesn't hurt to have the world's greatest actress voicing her.
Yeah,
Which is wonderful. And she was just a dream, and as amazing as you'd hope. So that was also an ace.
Yeah.
An ace up our sleeve.
No, I mean, I love that analogy of what we were seeing unfolding on screen between Rick and Pal. Now, the music here is Mother Spa has just knocked it out of the park once again. I expect nothing less when his name is attached to something. But here you have very specific needle drops melded with the score, and the score has so many different elements to it that bring in the with instrumentation that Mark does. You've got elements of the past, instruments that are more classical, that are, more in tune with pop culture over the years and music. Then you bring in some futuristic, some synth elements. So I'm curious what your conversations were like with Mark, with what you were looking for musically, and then melding that with needle drops that are very, very specifically placed and picked.
Yeah, I think in terms of Mark, it was along the same lines of the conversations that we had with the artists, where we were like, could we, is there a way to make this, is there a way to make this family feel really organic and alive and human and imperfect with the instrumentation? Like, we would sort of like encourage Mark to like play wrong notes and stuff like that when the Mitchells were around. Whereas when for the robots, like everything was like perfect, and everything was like, I don't know enough about music, like syncopated and like dun 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 dun. The timing was really even of all the robot stuff, and it was, we were trying to do the same thing with the music that we're doing with the art, is like meld find a synthesis of the past and the future. And then in terms of the needle drops and stuff, oftentimes those are just songs we loved, and really, again, we were just sort of, because the movie is this sort of like celebration of humanity, we wanted to have these really warm songs that had a band, because like bands are kind of messy, and the song, the notes aren't always played perfectly, but it feels really warm and human. So that's where a lot of the song choices came from.
Now, the songs that ended up in the film, are they the songs you envisioned along the way, or did that little thing called budget come into play with getting licensing?
You want to know? Here's a story. We didn't have enough budget because that song "Live Your Life" is very expensive. It has a lot of rights and all this stuff. So there was a point in the movie where we were like, oh no, we're not going to be able to afford all the music. And Chris Miller and Phil Lord were like, we'll pay for the music. And they paid for a bunch of the songs. And it was like, the studio was very right past, like, is this necessary? Is this one song necessary? Do we really need this? But we noticed that we tried to play ball. And we were like, yeah, well, let's try it. Let's try to find a cheaper option. And you could always hear it. You could always listen. You would watch the movie and you're like, kind of sucks now. What happened? And then it was like, it ended up being worth the money to those guys. Because they were like, we want the movie to be good. We don't care. So they paid for some of those songs. I think Sony might have paid them back at this point. But
well,
I don't know.
As successful as the movie's been, I certainly hope so.
Yeah, me too.
But, now that begs the question, with the animation editing process, editing is editing, but animation editing is quite different in many respects from live action editing. So I'm curious, did you have a temp track and temp music laid in to aid in the editing with finding your flow? Or talk to me about how you proceeded with that on this one.
Oh my God, it's so nice that you asked about. Nobody asked about editing. Editing is like the most important part of the process. I kind of think like every part is really important and vital, but like editing is like where the movie is either becomes good or bad. And our editor Greg Lovehin is so wonderful and sat in that room for so many hours. But really, because it's the interesting. I wish I could explain it to people because it's so wild. Because so many of the times we're writing scenes in the edit bay. Like we're just voicing characters, and I'm doing the temp scratch, and then we try a version, and then we watch it, and then we're like, no, that isn't good. Maybe this line here instead. Then you watch it again, and you're like, okay, it's getting a little better. And then you just do that forever. And the interesting thing about editing is it never stops in animation. It starts before you start animating anything. But I kind of thought, because, in the way that normal people perceive it, is that like, in animation you have to edit first because animation is really expensive. And that's true, but you're also editing until the very last minute. Because you could always make a joke a little crisper, or make an emotional moment hit a little harder, or what have you, with a little bit of jazzy editing. And our edit team was so wonderful, and they never gave up. And we were literally editing until the last minute of the last day.
Wow. One of the great things about the editing of this film, Mike, is that not only is everything do we get sufficient time and balancing this, that, and the other element, but you keep the energy up. We never lose the energy in this film. Sure, we have a couple slower moments, but there's energy happening. You don't let that lapse. And I am very impressed with that because given the visuals, given the vibrancy of the color and the layering of your color palettes, you need to keep that energy going, because if your editing goes slow, you're going to have a great disconnect there between the vibrancy and energy of what we're seeing, but we're not feeling it because it's dragging and lagging. And you avoided that, and I so love that with this film.
Oh, nice. Because I do think that stuff's necessary because there are some slow moments but they're slow intentionally because of the emotional moments, and I think that contrast is like one of the things that makes the movie work, where the movie can be pretty fast and frenetic, but we slow down for the emotional stuff. You know, because if you don't, your head will explode. You know, and it sort of it makes the emotional stuff feel more emotional, and it makes the funny stuff feel funnier. I think because we're sort of pushing both sides of that.
And I'm glad you mentioned funny, because how difficult was it and how much fine tuning went into the dialogue? Because the dialogue here is so peppered with pop culture over, you know, the 80s, the 90s. You've got throwbacks happening in here, your own love of movies. You've got movie references galore happening visually and in dialogue. How challenging was putting the dialogue together for this film?
Oh my God, wildly. That was one of the hardest things. You know, luckily we had these amazing actors who could bring a lot of themselves into it, and some of the best moments come from them. You know, because it's so, you know, you could write 1,000 lines in an empty room on your laptop, but when somebody comes out and just something comes out of their body and some new line comes out and they're like, oh, this is what I would say in that situation. You got to capture it, you know, and I think in some other movies, the idea is like, oh, don't use any of the stuff that the actors do. Like, hide that, you know, bury that in the back and light it on fire. But like in our movie, you know, since the whole operation was like, make it unique, we were able to use all these, you know, strange ideas that the actors came up with and the little halting starts and stops and half sentences that they would say before they say their actual lines. And, you know, because that stuff made it feel more human and alive. But on the other hand, just, you know, in terms of like dialogue and comedy and stuff, you know, that stuff's hard work, man. Like, you really got to have the stomach to re-edit a joke 500 times because, oh, the animation changed a little bit. It's somehow, for some reason, not as funny as it used to be. Ooh, now it's even funnier if you overcut this sound with that edit. Let's do 3 more frames on that. No, that's too much. Let's do 1 more frame. Perfect. You know, like the whole thing is really you have to have a lot of patience, and you have to really care about things being funny, or else they won't be.
And now we know why Bob Hope kept a room with every joke he ever wrote.
Hey, smart.
You know, one thing that has loomed and has stood out for me since I first saw the film last year, why a moose?
You know, that was something that Jeff Rowe, who's my co-writer and co-director, who's wonderful, came up with because we were trying to work on these scenes with Rick and Katie's relationship, and we're like, you know, it's also so verbal. It's also talky. And we were trying to think of a symbol for their relationship that was cinematic and not just verbal. So Jeff drew this sort of dusty little moose. I think it was an elk at first. An elk is like sort of a less cute animal.
Yes.
But he drew this like dusty moose, and it's like, what if Rick gave Katie this and she just threw it away, and it's like dusty, and the dust represents their, you know, this relationship that they used to have, and now it's been forgotten, you know. And it was like, oh man, that hit us so hard emotionally, and then that became the symbol for their relationship, where she initially throws it away, but by the end of the movie, she's treasuring it and she puts it in her pocket, and it's the thing that sort of makes me cry at the end. So yeah, that was sort of the idea.
No, I mean, I think the moose is cute. I mean, when the first time I saw the moose, I thought of Rocky and Bullwinkle. I thought of Bullwinkle Moose.
Hey, Rook, watch me pull a rabbit out of my head.
See? I got one last question for you, Mike. This is so wonderful, finally getting to talk to you about this film. I can't tell you.
Sure, hey, you got a lot of great points and questions. I love it. I'm here for it.
A lot of people, they want to make films. I want to be a director. I want to be a filmmaker. I want to be Orson Welles or whomever. But going into animation is something very specific. So I'm really curious, what is the magic of animation? What does animation mean to you as a storyteller?
Oh, yeah, sure. Everything. I mean, because the amazing thing about animation is you can literally do anything. There's no rules. The only rules are your own imagination. Again, which sounds trite, but it's true. Like, you can tell a story where it's a naturalistic family story that has a giant killer Furby in the middle of it. You can do anything. I mean, like, if you look at, there's so many amazing movies. Like Turning Red just came out, and that's like such a wildly different story than mine. But I felt it in my heart so much, and it's because you can and like in our movie, you can adjust every single dial. Like you don't have to accept, oh, you know what, it's raining today, so the scene has to be it's raining. Like, no, the weather can be whatever you want. The color of the sky can be whatever you want. The color of the characters' eyes can be whatever you want. Their faces can do anything you want. Like, you have so much control, and you can turn all of those dials to create a beam of joy and shoot it in people's hearts. And it's just like, it's by far my favorite art form.
Yeah.
And it's something that I don't ever want to leave.
Oh, well, I hope you don't leave it. My God. You're wonderful at it.
No, thank you.
Very quickly, Mike, if you had to sum up the Mitchells versus the Machines in one word, what would that word be?
Ooh. I'm going to cheat. Innovative and joyful. Boom! That was 3 words. I refuse the question.
Now, what were the 3 again?
Innovative and joyful.
Well, that's only 2 words. What's the...
That's 2 words. The and is the middle.
Oh, okay. And is in the middle. But if you say them real fast together, they come out as one.
It kind of sounds like one.
Yeah, see, just say...
Joy innovation.
Yeah.
Innovation, joy.
See, it works fine.
We'll figure it out.
Oh, Mike, my fingers are crossed for you and my toes for Oscar night.
Oh, what Oscar night? What is that? I'm curious. I've never heard of this before.
I know, it's just something where, there's a statue of a guy that was created based on somebody's butt, and it's gold.
I like the statue of the woman with the wings that I got at the HCA Award. That was good.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool statue. It took a couple years.
Yeah.
It took a couple years to get a design that was just right.
In all seriousness, we're looking forward to it, and it's really a joy to be in the same category as all these other movies, and it's just going to be a blast no matter what. So we're excited.
Well, I know you're going to have a good time no matter what. That I know.
Absolutely.
But I so want to see something creative and innovative and joyful win, because you think outside the box. Mitchells versus the Machines is outside the box. It breaks the norm, and that's what filmmaking is all about. Moving forward.
I love it. Right?
So,
you got to write the thing on the bottom, the back of the DVD.
I would love to write the thing on the back of your DVD. Oh, Mike, thank you so much. I hope we get to talk again in the future.
Yeah, me too. It was fun.
Oh, thank you. And until then, have a great weekend, Mike.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. It was awesome talking to you.